Welcome to the session, everyone. I'm Rachel Blackburn. I'm on the corporate operations team at Oracle, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. This webinar is part of our Oracle at Oracle webinar series, where we have the opportunity to hear from the executive team that reimagined Oracle. In the series of webinars, we share insights from our own journey to the cloud and demonstrate how we're using Oracle Cloud, and specifically today, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, to power our business and enable exceptional customer and employee experiences. And we'll share our learnings along the way so that others can do the same. And now let's dive into today's topic. Over the course of the next 30 to 40 minutes or so, you'll hear how Oracle NetSuite is running its business on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Now I'll pass it over to your host for the webinar today, Edward Chang, to introduce himself and tell you about what he does at Oracle.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here, share with you about our journey in the past, roughly about, I would say, a year and a half. Now it's close to 2 years of moving a very large SaaS application called NetSuite onto Oracle Cloud. And my name is Edward Chang. I am a Senior Program Director at NetSuite Oracle, managing several programs have to do with advanced technologies, but one of this program is called Move to OCI. So in the next, I would say roughly about 30 minutes, I'm going to share with you our journey. And I would share with you on a very high level to begin with, and then step by step dive into some of the detailed experience. And my hope is that through this 30 minutes or so, you would learn something about how to at least in our case, how we move a very large SaaS applications onto the public cloud infrastructure, and then also what are some of the benefits that we have gained. So right up front, when we are thinking about moving to the cloud, it is not so much working on a back office administrative overhead task, but more so we look at it as an opportunity of innovation. And so the entire group is looking at that opportunity that way. So maybe just very quickly to share with you what is NetSuite do. NetSuite is a very large SaaS application running already on the cloud before we come to OCI, but we manage our own data center. And so it is an ERP, enterprise resource planning application. So it has some finance modules, for sure, and then it has HR modules, asset management, and over the years we acquired several companies that basically do end-to-end managing the business for our customers. And so if you look at the size of NetSuite, we have roughly about 22,000 enterprise customers, and just the production side, we run at roughly about 8,000 cores with about 3,000 servers every day, managing roughly about 8 million transactions for our customers. So prior to moving onto OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, we manage 6 data centers around the world. And in moving on to OCI, our plan is to expand this 6 into roughly about 12 data center actually in the next few months. Today we are already running in Frankfurt and London on OCI, while our on-prem data center are still serving our old customers. New customers in Europe are going into the OCI data center in London and Frankfurt. So as I said, we are already, for over 10 years, 15 years, we have already been running as a SaaS application. So always we have been dealing with security, scalability, reliability, and all the issues that you can think of in running a SaaS application. Moving on to OCI, what we are thinking is this is a public cloud infrastructure technology. And so we want to take full advantage of that. And so right up front, we set some metrics in terms of what kind of gain do we expect to see, and what is our focus in terms of these gains. And there are 4 areas that we have identified. right in the beginning of the journey and said, this is our motivation, this is our goal of moving on to OCI. Number one is agility, and that is we continually are expanding at a 32% year-to-year expansion rate. And because of that, we constantly are thinking about opening newer data center, housing more customers in newer regions in the world, right? And so going on to OCI, what we want to gain is we want this to be more agile. We can move even faster based on business needs. So that is one. Secondly, is about cost optimization. So instead of having to invest continually about managing the data center, the mundane work of taking care of the details of the operations, for sure we still have to have operations people, right? But we want to outsource, in a sense, look at it as outsourcing a lot of that mundane work, administrative work, to the experts, OCI, to do that, okay? And in doing so, we see that our cost of doing this kind of managing data center would absolutely be optimized. The third is, as I said, is innovation that we are looking for. So once dealing with a public cloud technology, you have tremendous amount of technologies that come with it. It's not just about the infrastructure itself, but on that platform, you also have a lot of platform as a service technology that relate to managing big data, machine learning, AI, blockchain, and so on and so forth. So we want to take advantage of all those. Along with that, then of course we are, as I said, we grow very, very quickly globally. And as a result, we want to make sure that this move to OCI can support our business growth. So with that, at the end and through this talk, you will see how we have achieved that. And that is we have expanded from our 6 data centers initially located in both the North America as well as in Europe. We are expanding it to 8 OCI regions, but covering 12 data centers around the world in the next 18 months. And as I said, we already opened 2 of this data center, and we are opening 4 more in the next few months. And then next year, we will open up a total of 12 data centers. And in doing so, what is important is it would cut down the time of opening data center from originally 9 months. So let's say if we want to move into a new country because the business in that country is expanding and customer desire to host their data in that country. So as a result, we will open a data center there, right? In the past, we can already do that. We were already doing it, but it would take us roughly about 9 months to open a data center. It's a co-location data center. So we open it, prepare it in about 9 months with roughly about 50 engineers having to work on that project. Many of these people actually have to be in that geographic location. Now going on to OCI, we cut down this opening data center time. To spin up a data center would only take us a couple of days. So 2 days we can spin up a data center as compared to 9 months, and then use roughly about 2 months to do the preparation. So setting up the last little bit of work in terms of the network, in terms of doing QA, doing penetration tests, getting all the compliance issue resolved. That takes us roughly about 2 months now. So instead of opening a data center in 9 months, now we are opening in 2 months. Other metrics that we are looking at, as I said, one of the things is we look at saving, right? How do you optimize your cost of running your data center? So in doing the work with OCI, moving on to OCI, what we were able to do was to shift some of the focus of our staff from the mundane administrative work of managing data center into doing some innovative, creative work, right? Doing SDDC, software-defined data center work. So it's turning it into software, managing the software, and doing so also improve the quality of our work and the ability of being able to repeat our work again and again and again in opening up newer data center. Also, what we gain in this process is we gain in availability. So in this talk, I will share with you, we take advantage of the DR plan, the disaster recovery plan, multiple layer of disaster recovery plan available on OCI to improve availability for our customers. So with that, we are ready to dive into the actual work and that we have done. The way that we lay this out for you and the way we journey this process in the past year and a half on OCI of moving our very large applications onto OCI is by dividing it into 4 stages or 4 phases. So it started with the envisioning, right? It's about planning, it's about aligning. What is our vision? What are we trying to do? And lay out a high-level plan and bring together all the relevant stakeholders, making sure that we have a common mindset in terms of what we are trying to do in this big program of multiple projects, right? So that is the first one, envisioning. The second one is once we align our vision, then what we want to do is to architect this work, right? Instead of just jumping in and start, doing SDDC, implementing the software of the data center. Instead of doing that, we want to architect it, do a good planning of it. The architecture is not only about re-architecting the system architecture, the network architecture, that absolutely is part of it. But also the organization has to be re-architected, right? In the past, we are doing this by running on-prem data center. Now the organization has to be restructured, has to change. The governance has to change. And also we have to prepare our staff. We have to retrain our staff. So it's a great opportunity, not just in terms of a small group of people doing this project or program of moving onto public cloud, but more so is the entire organization would go through this process of growth, re-innovation, doing new things in new ways, right? So that is re-architecting. And then the third, of course, very important is now the engineers, the groups are prepared to do the work. And so they actually do the implementation. And so there is a process of doing that. And I would share that in the talk as well. And then finally, but not least, is to actually launch the cutover, right? So how do you move over to the public cloud, and how do you coordinate this work with professional services, with the field people, with third-party vendors that have solutions built on top of NetSuite, right? How do you coordinate that? And then eventually also communicate that change with customers. Before I actually go into these 4 phases, let me just share a couple more slides that when I prepared this talk, I feel that this is very, very important that folks who are planning for a move onto OCI should also keep in mind. So in moving on to OCI, you have to understand OCI is structured in such a way that it can engage very large enterprise of taking advantage of the infrastructure as a service. So because of that, it is not only, so if you look into the field of public cloud, right, any vendors in the field would provide you a set of infrastructure enabling you to move over into that public cloud infrastructure. Now, however, in the OCI situation, it actually makes a difference if you are a large organization moving onto public cloud. It is more than just having a bunch, a field, a farm of machines allowing you to use. But you can actually have different mentality, different methodology of taking advantage of that farm of infrastructure. So looking at this slide, maybe it's easier to read it from the right to left. And that is the easiest way of using OCI is you just think about lift and shift, meaning that you already are running some machines in a co-location data center, for instance, hundreds or thousands of machines. You can actually think of it in a simple way of simply taking that and just move over onto OCI. And initially, NetSuite actually did that. it took us roughly about a couple of months, maybe 2.5 months, to lift up the entire huge application of NetSuite and just shift it over onto OCI and just bring it up and run it like that. So initially we were doing this, but once we have done this, we realized that, well, in that way, we are just running OCI as another data center. We are not reinventing ourselves. So immediately we said, what better things can we do? So we come back to the drawing board and we said, let's design it and do a better way. Now, the second way that you can think about doing this maybe is between lift and shift and a redesign. And that is, you said, some of my application, actually, I can quickly move onto OCI. But in this move, I look into what are some of the quick low-hanging fruit that I can do a quick upgrade of the infrastructure. For example, simply in terms of clock speed, in terms of using some better networking infrastructure, virtual network, for example, to do your work, or a load balancer, or what have you, right? That in the past, you might be using older version of technology. Now in this move, then you simply do a quick upgrade. And that is another way of doing your move onto OCI. And then finally, the third way is you actually take a look at your entire application and your cloud architecture, and you do a redesign, re-architect your environment. Now, doing it the third way, of course, would take a little bit longer time. In our case, it took roughly about 9 to 12 months for us to do that re-architecture that I will share with you in a minute. And, but then in doing that, then we take full advantage of the OCI technology. In the NetSuite situation, because we are so big and we have so many different applications, and some of these applications we actually acquired over the years into as part of NetSuite, right? As a result, we actually use all three. So the core application, we actually do a re-architect to take full advantage of OCI. But some of these other applications, we just did a lift and shift, and after the lift and shift, we do some upgrade. And some of it is in the process of lift and shift, we do some upgrade. So that's what we have done. The second slide that I want to share with you before deep dive is that I want you to think about when you have a chance to move your application or your company onto a public cloud infrastructure. Don't just think about it as let's just jump in and do the work and get it over with. Don't think of it that way. It really is an opportunity of innovation. It's an opportunity of growth of all your staff and the entire organization. And because of that, I think it is important that you take it in a multi-phase mentality. Well plan this journey before you jump in. So as I said, the first step is we think about building a foundation, lay our foundation would enable us to swiftly and securely, safely move onto this OCI environment. And so some foundation might be doing some re-architecture, maybe establish some platform services to enable multiple data center to take advantage of that. One of the things that we did actually, we were always on Oracle database, but we were not taking advantage of the autonomous database, and we were not on the Exadata, which is, I would say, the top line database product in Oracle, right? We were not doing that. But in this journey, then we make a decision that we will lay out the foundation of taking full advantage of the database technology in Oracle. And so with that, we move ourselves onto Exa, and it's in our journey now onto autonomous in the next couple of years. So that is laying the foundation. So once you lay the foundation, then the second thing I think is very important to do is to identify your low-hanging fruits. Right. So because this is going to be a journey of a year and a half, or maybe even 2 years, talking about moving all our 22,000 enterprise customers onto OCI, it would take us another year to do, right? So the whole journey, therefore, can take a process of 2 years, 2.5 years. So it's a long journey. And if you cannot see the end and you cannot enjoy the fruits in the process, it can be quite draining. So as a result, the second thing I think is also very important is you define your metrics, identify some near-term, mid-term, and then long-term benefits that you are going to reap, and then actually see that happening. So that is very important. Make this journey deliver immediate value for you, right? So that is the second thing. And then thirdly, very important is now you have to figure out not just about taking advantage of OCI, moving your application onto OCI, but there would be some new applications in the process that you figure that you will spin up on OCI. And then there would be some legacy applications on your on-prem data center that you said eventually you're going to phase out these old applications. And guess what? At the end, you would have to switch off the light on your legacy, old classic data center. And that is the time, absolutely, you would save a lot of money, right? You end your lease with the co-location data center. So those are the things that I want you to keep in mind as we dive into this talk. So in the next roughly about 20 minutes, I would walk you through the detailed work in this move. And as I said, we divide it into different phases. The first phase is to envision, right? Is to make sure that everybody line up, all the stakeholders, identify the common goal, the common advantage, objectives of this move, and then also build the infrastructure, the organization to support this move. And then build the processes that would enable many of the engineering team, over 15 engineering groups, has to engage with this process of moving on to OCI, right? So that's exactly what we have done. And in doing that, we achieve the ultimate objective of gaining agility, innovation, reliability, and so on. So the objective can be clearly laid out in our case. You can say there are three major objectives of this journey of NetSuite. Number one is being able to open data center in the OCI global regions very quickly. And so we lay out a plan, talk to sales, what regions to open first. Secondly, then is move our existing customers from the classic legacy co-location data centers onto OCI. So that would be the second objective. 22,000 customers have to be moved. And then finally would be closing the classic data center, the 6 data center around the world that we want to switch off the light. Here is a quick roadmap. This is what we do. You can see on the left-hand side, the top is about build, right? So we build, meaning open data center in OCI regions, in North America, in Asia Pac, and then in EMEA, in Europe, and that region, right? And then the second portion of the work would be once some of this data center is opened, then we start moving our customers. And that is another portion of work. And then thirdly is about closing the existing data center. So even though it's 6 data center, but inside that city, sometimes we have multiple buildings that we manage to run the data center. So at the bottom, you see so many boxes have to be closed. And then eventually, once this plan is going on, based on the need of the business, we even open up more and more data centers on OCI. And as I said, opening a data center is only 2 months. To make this work, what is necessary is to embrace this as a change of the organization. So the way that we do it, you might not do it this way, but the way we do it is we do it in a program approach. What a program is basically inside the program, you can have multiple projects. And the program office actually is able to connect the projects and leverage the artifacts and the results of projects from one to another. And so we take a programmatic approach of doing this from a program office. And so I one of my group is actually this program director office, right? So that is the one that is orchestrating a lot of the moving parts in this journey. And the top management had a steering committee, but what is important is focus on the bottom layer of this chart. So there are 4 groups that we form in managing this move. The first one is what we call capacity planning committee. So in the past, you have procurement cycles, but when you use OCI, it's no more about procurement, right? It is like using electricity or water. It is a utility. And so many engineering group would come forward and said, I need 200 cores of compute and this amount of storage and networking and so on. So how do you justify whether they have the right amount of resource to do their projects? Why not more? Why not less? Why is the amount that you request? So there have to have a capacity planning committee that is focusing on vetting this kind of request and provide guidance for them. So time after time, when this committee had looked at different use case, then they are able to help these engineering groups to look at this request and approve or reject or provide guidance. So that first committee is very, very important. The second one is also very important. Is technology is a tech committee, technology and architecture committee. And that is various group of engineers want to work in OCI, but they are not familiar with the OCI technology. So through this committee, they gain guidance and best practices in terms of doing their architecture work and engineering work. The third group is the standard working group, right? So you don't want to open OCI as a wild west. Any engineers can come in and do things the way they want. They name things they want. They set up networks the way they want. Because OCI is a huge playground. There are just so many ways, so much technologies that you can do things in different ways. So what we want to do is we want to work with OCI to establish NetSuite standard of using OCI, naming convention, networking convention, security concerns, and many others. So we set up roughly about 12 articles regarding this standards for NetSuite engineering to use. And we also set up best practices that people are building certain things, and then we guide them and said, this would be the best practice. You don't have to follow, but this is the best practice that you can do. Then finally, once we move on to OCI, what is necessary is we have a service managed group that understand how we are spending money on OCI. Are we optimizing the use of OCI? And going forward, how do we plan, forecast our expansion on OCI, right? So the service management therefore become very important when you are spending a couple $1 million per month on OCI. This shows you a quick diagram of how the CPC, Capacity Planning Committee, has a process of looking at the request, providing guidance, either approving, rejecting, or requesting more information, right? So that there are processes that we have to set up to do that. And as I said, the tech committee, the technology and architecture committee, in OCI, there is a big group of architects that as customers of OCI, that you can actually interact with them as part of the support and services. That these are solution architects, experts on different subject matters. Maybe it's cloud architecture, networking, LBAS, database, security, and on and on and on, many different areas. And so our architects therefore build conversation with them so that when we have questions, we need guidance, we can get in touch with OCI. And we look at this work as there are 3 major bubbles that we need to maintain in order to support the entire large organization of NetSuite move on to OCI. The first area is about providing support and services, right? You have 15 groups of engineers, a couple hundred engineers, day in, day out working on OCI, building their environment, moving applications, using newer technology and so on and so forth. So you need to support them. And so the way we do it is we make sure that we build infrastructure that can support these people. And then secondly is about education and training. So we work with OCI. OCI had a lot of training modules that you can actually take. And for NetSuite, because we are so big, we actually work with OCI to customize OCI's training program to best fit our need. And then over time, NetSuite actually took over some of these training roles. We actually have our own trainer. And then finally, we actually do it online. We don't even need to use real people to do this training and education. But from time to time, we have refreshing course, right, as refreshers. So newer technology comes out, right? So we refresh, have a seminar, and invite our graduates to come back and take this refresher course. And then also we maintain a relationship with OCI, as I said, so that we understand the roadmap, so that we gain understanding of their latest technology and being able to use their technology. So that's the way that we're doing this. And with that, we form even another program called Global Expansion Program. And the program's job is merely just expand data center and services around the world, right? So the original program was only about moving NetSuite application onto OCI. It doesn't care where and how many data centers. It's just make that work possible. And GXP take that and replicate the work again and again, and opening a lot of data center, working with roughly about 12 engineering groups to make that happen. So once envisioning is done, then now you move on to actually doing the architecture. Now, when saying doing the architecture, then part of it is about system architecture, network architecture, but part of it is also preparing your organization, re-architect your organization, get the staff ready. So if you look at NetSuite, is a simple 3-layer architecture application. The users use a browser, access our application servers. The application server performs certain logic, eventually will be accessing the database and bring the information back to the customer. Right, so is an environment like this. In an environment like this, what is very important is about scalability. So to support 1,000 users is one thing, to support 10,000 users is a different one. Now supporting millions of login is even more different, right? So how do you scale that out? That is one question. And then secondly, how do you make sure that even when portions of the internet, for example, is being interrupted, but you would not impact a lot of your users, and you can bring yourself back up very, very quickly, right? So you need to look at your disaster recovery plan. And so in doing that, we architect ourselves, taking full advantage of the scalability, reliability, agility, security on OCI to do the work. Now, the network architecture is very, very important. Initially, when doing the lift and shift, we don't redefine our network architecture. But once we started seeing the opportunity of reinvent ourselves, we work with OCI to redefine this architecture. So in this picture on the top layer, you can see that inside the old data center, there is a setup for doing QA, what we call F, right? It's actually doing QA, that we can actually regress our system, we can run tests, and so on and so forth. And then there is a almost exactly identical environment that is doing the production, that is actually serving the customer. All of this environment are secure, right? But in this production environment, it actually houses customer data. And then there's a third environment in the data center, what we call a regional service. Region, meaning that in OCI, they think about a geographic location as a region, not as a data center. Because inside Ashburn, for example, there are actually multiple buildings, multiple data centers that OCI run to support their customers. And so when we go into, take this example, Ashburn, we might not just open one data center. As a matter of fact, today we are opening 3 data centers inside Ashburn and inside Phoenix. So therefore, each of this data center will have some common services that they share. Those we call this third box, regional services. And therefore, you scale it according to how many data centers you want to open in a OCI region, right? And you don't have to have so many regional service. So you just have maybe n times m mapping between the data center and the regional service. So that is a part of the architecture. And then finally, we have what we call a snap environment, also a QA environment. The only difference is when customer hit a problem, we want to have an environment that we can quickly spin up the customer's identical environment and debug it over there. And so we have this environment. So now, previous to OCI, we have this concept, but the layout would be more manual. It's not as SDDC, it's not as software defined. Now the entire thing is software defined. And so we want to replicate this, as I said, only take a couple of hours. But to run the QA test, the penetration test, get the compliance ready, then it takes 2 months. So this is one data center, right? The next diagram shows you is when you have 2 regions. So let's say between Frankfurt and London, right? Each of this, the top part, let's say you can think of region 1 is Frankfurt, and then the bottom part, region 2 is London. Each of them are actually having their environment to serve customer accounts. But at the same time, through the networking connection, one of the data center is actually serving as a backup site of the other data center. So it is active backup environment. So that is how we re-architect ourselves. The other thing that we have also innovated is what we call the SDDC lab, but basically it's a lab, it's a NetSuite lab, right? What do you mean a lab, right? If you think about any of our engineers, when they have to do development or troubleshoot or whatever deployment of a service, when they want to do this, they need a NetSuite environment to do the work. But the NetSuite environment itself composed of maybe 70 servers and 10 load balancer and multi-terabytes of data. So you can imagine if the engineers, every engineer group or a few engineers has to figure out how to set up this environment on OCI by themselves, it would take a lot of learning, a lot of work. So therefore, we define this by using SDDC, that there is a more sophisticated environment, that we define the roles of the machines and the connections, relationship between the machines, and put all that into Terraform script, so that when a engineering group come forward and said, I want to do work on OCI, they push a button and the lab would expand and open up in front of that. And then they can start in a few hours, they can start doing work on OCI. So they don't need to set up an R&D environment themselves, right? So this is a very, very powerful, why we can move so fast. This is one of the ideas that we adopt. I shared with you earlier that there are training, and this is what we do. So initially it's 3 days training, and then become 2 days, and now we are in the mode of just doing online training. And so after the architecture, then what you do is the actual engineering work. So we work with 12 engineering groups, is continually expanding, but 12 engineering groups primarily to prepare them to do engineering work on OCI, right? So all these groups, different groups are inventing different things, working through the tech, the technology and architecture committee to build their design in various areas. And then slowly expanding also to back end, right, about operations, site reliability engineering, and even taking advantage of some of the platform technology, use machine learning to do some of security, some service management, and so on and so forth. I mentioned earlier that standard is very important in this big playground. And so the standard working group come together and define actually a total of 12 articles representing the standards that engineering groups, when they come forward working in NetSuite on OCI, they have to follow this. This is the way that they should do work, right? So in our training class, we expose them to these guidelines so that they will follow it. And so once the engineering started to work on their thing, started to lay out and deploy, then it is time that we started to prepare ourselves for launch, right? In doing launch, then is a process. Part of it is work with SRE, the operations people, to rewrite our playbook. So in the classic data center on-prem, of course, we already have playbooks, but now we are collaborating with OCI, right? So we have to understand the different level of alerts, and when an alert happens, what are we supposed to do? If it is database, networking, load balancer, what have you, what are you supposed to do? Who should be informed, and so on and so forth. So that is part of the work. The other part of the work is actually making sure that we are able to manage the entire life cycle, right? You're going forward with, on OCI, you would do your patches, your effects, your hard push, all that on OCI. So what is that process of doing it on OCI? So we have to establish that. And then finally, engineering communication is very important. Talk to our third-party vendors, get them ready for the move onto OCI, and also inform our customers that the move is coming. So even though this is supposed to be transparent, right? NetSuite is not supposed to tell the customer, we are running your service in Seattle or what, you know, we are not supposed to explicitly do this kind of thing, but at least let them know that we are sort of like doing an upgrade, right? Moving on to our public cloud infrastructure. So we want to let them know, communicate with them. So the final story before OCI, we are in this kind of situation, 6 data center, 700 databases, 2 petabytes, continually growing. In roughly about a year, we open up in Frankfurt and London, OCI. And in the next year or so, we will open up a total of 12 data centers on OCI, cutting down the opening of data center to 2 months. And wherever there's a business need, it doesn't matter which country, as long as sales and business suggest that it justifies opening a data center in that country, we can spin up a data center. And what kind of benefits did you guys actually reap? Exactly as how we set out. Rapid expansion, 9 months become 2 months. More robust on demand, right? When we want to scale up, we scale up. We don't have to go through a procurement life cycle. When newer chips come out, faster chip come out, we retire the older machine and immediately move on to the new machine. We are not stuck with the life cycle of the machine. OCI take care of that. We don't have to take care of that. Increase uptime, simply because of the fact that on OCI, you have multi-regional, multi-availability domain, multi-fault domain kind of idea of multiple level of building reliability. We take full advantage of that to build into our DR story. Faster response time. We are already, OCI itself already use machine learning, but we also are engaging with the machine learning group, trying to apply machine learning into managing our service. In so doing, we would be able to detect problems before they even come up, right? When you see that in a certain season, a lot of business is getting onto a certain load balancer or in a certain region, then there are certain things that the machine can alert us and we can respond to it. Right? Faster performance, I already talked about how we scale to newer chips, newer architecture whenever they are available. And then also continually strengthening our security with adaptive security with a higher standard of security bar. So the next step that we are planning, we are working on is from Exa, we will be moving on to autonomous database. Hope that one day we'll come back and share with you our journey onto autonomous as well. So finally, what are the lessons learned? I think a few things I want to, you know, perhaps as take home, right? One is first determine what is the approach that is best fit for you, right? Should I just do a lift and shift? Should I do a redesign, or should I just get some upgrade, right? So think about that. Secondly, make sure to phase your migration. Don't just jump in and move, right? Make some plans. Thirdly, is manage it as managing change, right? It's an opportunity for the entire organization. Upgrade the skills of your staff, take this opportunity and embrace all this wonderful technology on OCI. And last but not least, when you do the work with a public cloud, automate whenever you can, because I am sure that you would find that once you engage with cloud, you would expand much faster compared to what you imagine.